So you guys are all worked out and ready for, sitting for the next half hour? I'm Christine Rinella. I run OhioHealth's driver rehab program. And the word salad after my name probably doesn't mean anything to you, but I am an occupational therapist by trade. That is what the OTRL stands for. I am a certified driving instructor with the state of Ohio, which is the CDI, and I'm also a driver rehab specialist. So that is what all of that fun stuff means. So Parkinson's disease. This is my favorite animation that I have ever found of somebody with Parkinson's disease because I have yet to meet him, and I don't know if you guys have found him along your travels either. But your typical motor effects that you see with it are your general slowness of movement. So you're not as fast as maybe you once were. You oftentimes have some rigidity or some stiffness, some trembling of the head. Your trunk or your core might be a little bit more forward tilted than everybody else. Maybe you don't feel like you can stand up as straight. Your arms don't quite swing when you walk. They feel like you have 10-pound weights on them. And just in general, you can have some shuffling, or you think about the person that doesn't pick their feet up when they walk. And then also some just general stiffness and trembling, or what we know as our pillbox rolling hands that kind of hang out by our sides. So those are the motor effects that people traditionally put with Parkinson's disease, and all of those can relate to what happens behind the wheel. Your non-motor effects, or the things that people don't generally talk about, are things that you can't see. So anxiety and depression can come with the change in your physical performance and stature, mood swings from what's happening, sometimes dementia or a slowness of your thought process that can perceive someone to think that you have it. And then there's also a sleep cycle disruption. So it's one that you have a hard time falling asleep because you can't get comfortable from the stiffness or rigidity, but you also have a hard time staying asleep. And over the length of the disease as it runs, that gets more and more pronounced. So as your brain doesn't get its full sleep rest cycle and hitting the REM cycles, it can show some cognitive decline associated with it. Everybody's favorite topic, Parkinson's disease and driving. Whose job is it? The better question is, which one does each person do? So you have the BMV's role. They officially give you a license, and they officially can take it away. So it's just like mom that said, I brought you into this world, I can take you out of it. That is their role. It is officially based in the state of Ohio on your medical doctor or your primary care physician or neurologist's note in regards to what you can do and what you can't do and how they feel your fitness to drive is. But they also can conduct medical investigations. So say you're having an increase in crashes over the last 6 months. Somebody red flags your account with the BMV and they send you a letter and say you have 60 days to get us a written thing from your doctor that you can continue to drive. So what your doctor's role is, they can make the referral to me, or they can accurately report on your medical fitness to drive through that form. And that is one that you go into the office, you sit down across the table from them, and you hash it out. It still typically ends up with you getting sent to me, I hate to break it to you. And then what is my role as the drive program, or say Ohio State's role as a driver rehab program as well? Our job is to do a comprehensive driving eval and behind-the-wheel assessment and accurately report our findings to your doctor in consideration of the total picture. So just because you pass with me or you didn't pass with me isn't always the end or the answer to everything. Sometimes I will pass people, but because of medications you're on or other side effects that you can have, the doctor will sometimes have to put their foot down and say, right now isn't the best time, let's see if we can get you back there, but it's good to know that you still have the skills. So these are some of those be honest questions that everybody hates to ask themselves. Are you or your loved ones voicing concern about your safety to drive? So have you become lost, or have you had recent bumps or dings in your car that you can't explain? Maybe there was a big scratch up the side that you go, that wasn't there 3 days ago. Do you have trouble turning your head to look over your shoulders? So we talked about those motor effects of Parkinson's disease. Your head kind of comes forward, your trunk tilts. Guess what you can't do as much anymore? Turn your head and your shoulders to check those blind spots in the car. Or when you're not driving, do you feel left out because you can't drive or get into the community? So is it something that if you're not behind the wheel, do you have other ways to get out and still do things? Like come to classes like this, go to the library, go to anything out in the community. Maybe it's your weekly bridge club that you typically would go to prior to getting to the point where your Parkinson's keeps you from behind the wheel. And then my personal favorite, have you become lost while driving? And if the answer is yes to that one, I really am curious about how you ended up getting found. So some caution signs with Parkinson's disease are more frequent falls, because we know that your balance starts to get a little bit harder to keep. You have a slowing response time with your initiation of movement, but also carrying movements out. So the Delay the Disease program works to combat that and make you faster. So once you get going, you can keep going, but it's that get going that you have to work on. Are you beginning to become forgetful? Maybe with routine things, like you go, do I make a right up there on Main Street to get to the grocery store, or do I make a left? And requiring increased time to process information. So maybe it's something that you would consider to be a routine, but it's taking you longer and longer and longer to do something. So some red flags. These are some big ones. Are you having frequent falls to where it's maybe not once a month, but twice a week, 3 times a week? Is there a significant balance component that we need to be worried about as you walk to your car, get in your car, drive safely to wherever you need to go, interact with where you've gone, get back in your car, go home, get out, and then get into your home? That entire chain of events is what community mobility, by definition, to me as an occupational therapist, is. So that is what we assess in the drive program, is your ability to not just get behind the wheel, but drive safely, get out, do everything you need to do with where you're going, and then safely return to where you came from. And frequent falls can oftentimes be a part of that. If you have a cane or a walker, or I saw a rollator come in, can you load that and unload it safely into the car with getting in? Or do you have somebody that is always with you that could do it? Freezing. So this is a big one. Say you're behind the wheel, you're coming up on a red light or a stop sign, and you get stuck. Your foot's on the accelerator, what are you gonna do? Right into the car in front of you, or into the intersection. So that's one that freezing is something that is a really big red flag with the consideration of Parkinson's disease, because it's one that you don't know when it's coming. And it's one that I can't give you a strategy to prevent anyways. Forgetfulness is increasing to the point where, say you're having a hard time managing your own medications, paying your bills on time, or getting the accurate amounts at the right time to the right people. Some of those really high-level things that we oftentimes think, okay, that's super easy. It's the first of the month. I know rent's due or the mortgage is due. The electric comes out on the 15th, but as that starts to blur together, you can sometimes see impairments there. And are you even slower to process information? So sometimes it's kind of like you have a delay. If you think about TV, we have that 4-second delay of when things happen in real life to when they come across the TV. If that's starting to happen in conversation with people and thinking things through, that can oftentimes be a red flag for decreased processing. And then just a general decline in mobility, which we've already hit on, which is getting in and out of the car with increased difficulty. If it's something that somebody looks at it and goes, I don't know how they get in and out of that car every day without falling, then it's sometimes that we can look at, are there adaptations to help you get in and out? Or is there a simpler way to do it? And I know that David Zid with Delay the Disease has some strategies for getting in and out. But when you're in the driver's side, you have a nice big wheel that gets in your way sometimes. So how a driving eval works is I'm the most fun you'll ever spend 2 visits with, and then you never want to see again, is what I say. So step 1 comes from your doctor, is your referral. So that's a prescription just like you would get for a medication or a therapy or anything else. You take that piece of paper and you call us and you say, I need a driving evaluation, my doctor recommended it, and I have a prescription. Step 2 would be the clinic evaluation. This is where I put you through a battery of physical, cognitive, and motor tests. So it's vision, cognition, and motor. Just like what you need to drive a car. You have to be able to see the road, perceive it, interact with it cognitively, but also physically maneuver and steer the vehicle. So once you hit marks and we identify where your at-risk components are in each of those areas, you either move forward to an on-the-road evaluation where I physically put you behind the wheel, or we look at a plan for remediation or ways to train and improve the skills that you do have to get you back up to be a lower risk behind the wheel. And then the on-road is done with me. We have a driver's ed car, and we physically put you behind the wheel, and we go for what I like to hopefully call joy rides, where nothing bad happens and you leave with a smile on your face. But if they don't, we do have a break on the passenger side. And so it's something that as you go through a course or a typical routine route that you may take, because I do ask, if you're not on the highway, I'm not going to throw you on 71 going south through downtown Columbus. I'm not that evil yet. But I try to mimic what you typically drive. So if you're the around town driver or, from suburb to suburb, but you know all of your back roads, that's what I test you on. I'm not going to ask you to do something you wouldn't typically do. And from what I see with how your eyes are checking, can you look at your blind spots, effectively merge into different lanes, take those pesky roundabouts that keep popping up? That is what goes into the report. So even though you can clinically test at risk in several areas, if it doesn't physically change your ability to operate the wheel safely or operate behind the wheel safely, then there's no issue. So there are things that people come up impaired in 4 or 5 categories, but as long as they don't hit a threshold, I can progress them forward. Which is how the driving eval works. And from there you do get a recommendation of pass, fail, what do we need to work on. So we talked about the clinic portion, so Your vision, we predominantly look at depth perception and contrast sensitivity, so your ability to perceive the distance between you and other vehicles, but also looking at your depth or your contrast sensitivity of variable levels of light. So on a day like today, it's pretty gloomy and overcast. But how is that different than your really bright, sunshiny day where you might have to deal with glare or the sun coming into your eyes? That's what we have to judge, is where is your vision threshold for potentially having issues. The other part with vision is you do have to show me that you passed the state vision test, which is 20/40 or better, corrected or uncorrected, for distance, and then for nearsightedness or reading up close yet near acuity is 20/30 or better for the state. And then you do have some peripheral and nasal vision things that you have to meet, but that's if you were going to renew your license. So I look at a lot more beyond that. So your cognition looks at attention, your scanning, your ability to process what we call spatial orientation, or your ability to judge right and left in space as you look at something versus as you're approaching. But then also your topographical orientation and navigation. So can you understand how to get back to wherever you came from by flipping directions? And then also your physical abilities. So the on-road, that is the part that we've talked about. I'm a certified driving instructor and occupational therapist, so I'm technically with the state, I'm legally allowed to do these. And then the actual on-road assessment is various skills and abilities and scenarios that we put you through in a real vehicle, on the road with everyday drivers just like you and me. So your next question is probably, what is it going to cost me? Because that's usually what happens next, and everybody's eyes got really big and head popped up. So if you weren't paying attention, you were now. So unfortunately, Medicare considers driving a privilege, not a right, as do most things that follow Medicare and Medicaid guidelines. So it is not a covered service by most Medicare and Medicaid and managed plans. And even for privatized insurance companies, it's not usually covered. It's probably about 33 to 38% of them will cover if you have a privatized insurance company, for just that reason. And this is actually a direct quote from one of the denials that I got a couple weeks ago. It's not medically necessary for independent living. What do you guys feel about that? Don't believe it? Because I didn't either. The other perk, though, is if anybody lives in Delaware County, we've written for a grant through the county funding, and we are actually able to provide services for free to Delaware County residents that are 55 and above, and can prove that they live within the county. We're working with Franklin to establish something similar, but unfortunately the cost does come out of pocket, but if you are paying kind of cash for it, there is a discounted rate that we can offer. And we can talk about that in the questions, because I know you probably want true facts and figures, but I can tell you a driving evaluation right now will probably cost you about $600 for the full thing out of pocket. This is my favorite little picture that I found along the way. So any questions? Because I'm sure there will be several. So the question was, if it's not a covered service by insurance, why do you need a medical script to do it? That actually comes down to the fact that I am an occupational therapist, and I cannot be an independent practitioner without the doctor's request for me to intervene. So if I had a doctorate of physical therapy, I could be an independent practitioner, but because I do not have a doctorate, I only have a master's degree, I'm not considered in the eyes of the law to be an independent practitioner. That's actually a real fun gray area to get into. Any other questions? So in total, it can be up to about $600 for just the clinical evaluation and on-road evaluation. But then with the discounted rate, I think we've got it down to about $450. So we have a 2014 Chevy Impala. So it's your typical mid-size four-door sedan. I wish we had the Mustang, but unfortunately we have your typical family car.
Driving, you're in much more control of the disease.
So looking at just the physical components, and kind of the argument that he's making, or the statement might be a better word for it, is that when you're sitting, he feels he has better control of his limbs and extremities to operate the vehicle. And so that is true from just a physical component standpoint of you have the support of the seat for under your legs and under your back for the trunk, but your arms and legs are still moving independently. So that's where you have that sense of more control, because a lot of your body isn't co-contracting to maintain a position or maintain a movement. But as you look at driving, there's also the physical, your physical part, which that touches on, but your cognitive and your visual components. So somebody that maybe has more cognitive involvement with their Parkinson's disease, that may not necessarily change the way that they can operate a vehicle, or their fitness to drive, as we call it, because they have decreased divided attention or selective attention, or even decreased processing, where there is that few second delay that they're seeing with when they're told something, when they can really process it and then act on it. So a lot of times the barrier is the cognition or the vision behind the wheel, not always the physical motor component. But I can see that that would oftentimes be the case. And a lot of times when I do have male patients with that, they will say that, you know, my wife has been doing more of the driving, but I still want to be able to do simple things around town when she's not available, or I don't want to feel like I'm bogging her down. And that's very common. So I always tell patients that, and when I give these presentations, we all someday, myself included, will outlive our driving capabilities and skills. And I pray to God that there is some sassy Italian blonde girl that rips the keys out of my hand when that time comes. And then the world will have come full circle. But it is true that as we age, we fight natural aging, but with this disease, it's progressing that at a little bit faster rate than everybody else. And that's one of the easiest ways to transition to being a passenger, as I like to call it, which is the nice way of saying you're not driving anymore. Is building through and breaking through that stigma of being the man, you're the provider, you're the driver, you're the kind of the head honcho, but moving more towards the shared responsibilities. And what's interesting is, as you know, other generations are changing, that stigma naturally has changed, where you see more shared households, and you know, you don't have the male that was the worker that brought home the income. You have more of a shared, you know, both the male and the female, or male and male, female, female, that both worked. So you're not seeing that stigma, but a lot of times I'll get patients that say exactly what you've just said, that, you know, my wife does more of it or my husband does more of it, and that's really okay with me. And that naturally eases the process of getting out of the primary driving role.
You have to wait?
There's no official time frame. It's more a question of what was the issue. So if it's a vision issue, say you have a cataract, is it getting the cataract removed, being cleared from the ophthalmologist, coming back and taking it again because you couldn't see well enough to pass? You weren't able to see the road signs, or things were a little too cloudy and you just happened to catch a snowy day or a cloudy day, and you kept missing all of those street signs because you couldn't read them because they had a white background with little black text in the middle of a white sky. Or is it something that your medications were a little out of whack and you needed more time to adjust to that schedule and then test once the medications had been adjusted appropriately? So it really depends on what the issue is that keeps you from being behind the wheel. But there is unfortunately a point sometimes where, you know, there's the point that I have to say, I think we're done now. And sometimes that gets a little easier because I'll see people and I'll say, okay, come see me again in a year, and people will retest naturally in the program. Any other questions? And I can answer that. So why would you do it is the question. You know, why would you actively put yourself through a program like this? Sometimes, and it happens a lot with other diagnoses, it's to get a baseline performance documented. But other times it's to get that clearance so that if something happens, even if you're not at fault, it goes to legislation in the court, and then guess what? You have to defend your ability behind the wheel. And so I've sat as a character witness for several of my patients that I have passed, defending that, yes, that is what I wrote, yes, that is how they performed that. I don't foresee how they could have been at fault for providing any cause to be at fault in any way for the accident. So for instance, I had a patient that got T-boned going through a green light. The light was green going their way, and this person just missed the red light, hit them. But I went to court because they said, oh, well, they ran the red light. You know, one of those he said, she said cases. And so they do a full medical, and they'll pull your full medical file and have people go through it. And as soon as they see a progressive neurological disease, like Parkinson's disease, they're going to rip into it. And so the more that they rip into it and dig, the more something like this can actually help than be harmful. So that's sometimes where people will go through it early on in the disease course if they get a new medication shift, or the doctor says, how are you feeling behind the wheel? You know, having any issues? And they say no, and there could come a point where the doctor says, you know, I'd like you to go through it, not because I don't think you're safe, but just for the documentation to support it. That is $1 million question that I get asked all the time. So the question was, where do I identify the point of needing to have this done as the patient or as the spouse of the patient? Yeah. And the biggest thing comes down to, we call it insight in rehab. It's your ability to perceive your abilities, whether they're good, bad, indifferent. And the way that you judge that is if you're starting to feel uncomfortable, or you're getting a little nervous going through places that you've driven multiple times, because you say, you know, I feel like I can't really see what's over here. I know I have a blind spot, but I'm not seeing all of it. Or, you know, you're looking to the right and you go, there was a car there, but I didn't see it initially. So it's one of those that you kind of have to be honest with yourself. There's no identifier that I can say, as soon as you see that, you need to run to your doctor and get an order. And I always joke, and I tell my family this because they probably hate having me in the family. I always joke that identify that one person that when they tell you it's time to look into this further, You don't even put up a fight. You say, okay, if you're telling me it's time, it's time. And if you have that one trusted family member, whether it be your spouse, your brother, your sister, your best friend, the neighbor, somebody that you can actively say, I trust their judgment, and when they feel like I shouldn't be doing this anymore, that's when we'll go get the evaluation just to lay it to rest. The no driving cars, I love this. So I know a little bit too much about them. And if it weren't for all of us able-bodied drivers on the road, we would have no issue with the self-driving cars. It is our unpredictability that keeps them from driving safely, and that's why they have more crashes than us. So they don't have the problem solving, or what we call executive functioning, to get out of the way and defensively drive. But if you had only self-driving cars on the road, they'd never crash. But it is coming. Give it 10 years and I think you're going to see the first automated vehicles completely hitting the road. The first thing that I always say, if you haven't driven for a prolonged period of time, and I hate to always ask it, but why? Why now? Why say, okay, I'm going to get behind the wheel again? And it doesn't matter what the answer is to me. It doesn't matter at one bit to me, but I will ask you that in the clinic because I want to know what the reason is. Is it getting to the grocery store? What's the motivation for being behind the wheel after having hit the pause button for so long? And then the next question is, have you had a real big change, say in medications, that's prompted you're more functional? Is it that you've gotten more involved in, type of wellness programs like Delay the Disease, but also just improved wellness overall? That maybe your functional status has improved from where you were 2 or 3 years ago. And then from there, I say, let's go through the clinical part, identify where you might be at risk. And then I'll say, okay, I think you'd be okay. Go out, try it in a parking lot or, the residential area. Don't go out on the highway, first of all, and then come see me and let's see what we can do. So I have had a lot of people that have, hit the pause button for a period of time and then come to me for driving to be evaluated. But a lot of times there's been something in that time frame that's happened, whether positive, initially something negative and then a lot of positives, that we got to that point. So does that help answer your question? Yeah, thank you.